Alright, the subject this video deals with is the various methods and problems with integrated pest management and some of the commonplace up-to-date strategies being implemented in the field. As you may or may not already know, integrated pest management is a farming household management technique resulting from the Green Revolution to the 70s and 80s, and essentially, IPM deals with the interactions of pests with the environment, usually crops. Pests have a great potential to ruin crops and come in all flavors, be it a single-cell protozoan or a fungus or even a fly. Such an example of this is the infamous water mold famine in Ireland in the 1840s, called the Black Forties. Devising economically effective, environmentally friendly methods to reduce the pest problem is what IPM is all about. I will examine several of these methods of modern times and point out the pros and cons. Now, the concept of IPM began in as early as 1812, in which farmers in the U.S., well, at that time they were starting to think about the Confederacy, but anyways, they advocated supervised insect control, which amounted to entomologists supervising levels of pests at given lengths of time. This analysis led to the treatment of the crop with at best a guesstimate of how much synthetic insecticide should be used to treat the crop, given the ecology and biology of the surrounding flora and fauna. This backbone laid much of the ground for the integrated approach adopted by the California entomologists in the 1950s. Typically, this approach meant slapping pesticides onto a crop without considering much of the consequences. Today, there is a more integrated approach, and we should be glad. In the United States, IPM was formulated into national policy in February 1972 when our favorite president, Richard Nixon, directed federal agencies to take steps to advance the concept and application of IPM in all relevant sectors. Now, in 1979, President Jimmy Carter established an interagency IPM coordinating committee to ensure development and implementation of IPM practices. The IPM system in America seeks after 6 basic principles. Number 1, acceptable pest levels, which means control, not eradication, because eradicating an entire pest population is nigh on impossible and would be much more economically and biologically costly. Also must be taken into account that at one location an acclaimed pest might pose a threat, but at others it might not be so bad. Secondly are preventative cultural practices, i.e. picking the best possible place to grow a given crop, and maintaining a healthy crop is often the best line of defense. Other such practices are removing the diseased plants are a great step in preventing disease spread. Number 3, regular monitoring of the crops, which is perhaps the cornerstone of IPM. This part facilitates 2 phases, observation and identification. Fourth, mechanical controls, often reoccurring when a pest has reached an unmanageable level. Hand-picking, insect barriers, traps, and vacuuming, and even using tillage to disrupt pest breeding as part of this structure. Number 5, the biological controls. Oftentimes, companies will develop pests that eat other pests that are economically harmful to a crop, and that is the large focus in this 5th tier here, if you will. For example, say a certain beetle decided to prey upon a crop of maize in Speaks, Texas. This beetle carries with it a harmful strain of virus that is a notorious maize killer. Mech Broom Biologicals decides to create a pest, in this case another beetle, which preys upon the virus-carrying beetle. The beetle also costs little to engineer and has defenses capable of preventing virus spread. This is an example of biological control. And lastly, responsible pesticide use comes into play, if at all. That's a major debate, which we'll talk about later. But typically, synthetic pesticides are used in this category. Many of the newer pesticides in use today are actually derived from naturally occurring toxins, such as nicotine, and the active toxic component, also called the toxophore, is often amplified to increase biological capacity. Identifying every level of this system can help define an efficient IPM system that integrates multiple techniques to provide the best output. Some of the current struggles integrate, thus the name integrated pest management, several of these techniques to provide the most effective strategy. Some are more costly but effective, and some are cheap and less desirable. But maintaining the best economical and environmentally friendly choice is the object here. We're trying to combine something so that the tree huggers will be happy and so that also people who are looking to make an extra buck will also be pleased. Let's just run through an example of what would happen with a typical IPM approach. And in this case, a farmer plants a crop X in a location Y. The crop begins to germinate, and about 4 weeks before harvest, the farmer notices a problem with his crop, and he concludes that plants are dying. He cannot pinpoint the agent responsible for the destruction of his crop, so he does what has traditionally been done and slaps a pesticide onto the crop. The pesticide has had no positive effect on the death rate of the crop, and the farmer becomes even more frustrated than he previously was. To that end, the farmer then introduced a biopesticide into the crop to see if perhaps the pest was resistant to the initial pesticide. It turns out that the biopest actually had a negative effect on the crop's death rate, and the potential crop yield decayed even more. Obviously, this was a very ineffective approach to the problem. Let's analyze what he could have done more effectively. First, we do not even know if the farmer planted the crop X in the most appropriate location Y. This could have had a very large impact on the crop's potential yield. Perhaps factors such as soil pH, absorption of water could play into effect here, as well as the minimal mineral contents of the soil. This falls under bad preventative cultural practices. Secondly, the farmer does not even know if what is affecting his crop is treatable by pesticide. Perhaps the pest is a virus native to the soil of the area, so treating the crop with the pesticide Z is incredibly economically risky, and potentially could bring environmental damage when flooding occurs as pesticide concentrations build up in soil and then wash down waterways. Third, the farmer then decides treating the crop with a biological pesticide might work, again not knowing the exact issue. Both of these problems stem from a lack of identification, and observation is also very lacking. I remember that identification and observation of the issue is probably the most important step in IPM. If you don't know what's affecting your crop, you can't treat it, and if you don't even notice it in the first place, you don't know what to look for. Now that we've discussed a general viewpoint in IPM, let's begin discussing where it's going to go. A farm bill was passed in 2008 that granted $307 billion to various agricultural pursuits. This divvied up to about $20 million over the next 10 years or so, and this new fund and research led to a published paper in Nature earlier in 2010 that confirmed a rising suspicion that conventional farming methods actually make the pest problem worse, involving treatment by chemical pesticides, eventually creating pesticide-resistant pests, among other things. The research culminated with the result that if there are more varieties of plants around the field and no broad-spectrum pesticides, as in organic farming, it promotes balance among insect species rather than letting one species dominate. I have a nice little quote here. There are more natural enemies and they do a lot better job in organic fields in controlling pests, says Dr. Crowder from that article. In other words, wiping out all insects in the field is often bad because there are more natural pest-fighting pests available to fight, while the pest population naturally without the use of pesticide to target just one harmful species, which greatly benefits organic farming. And it looks like organic actually has industrial beat in this respect. However, this argument is not without controversy because, for example, allowing a larger variety of plants to grow increases biodiversity in an area, which might attract disease-carrying rodents which are not affected by organic models. Now, local buyers stated they would not buy produce that was dirty in this respect, and the argument is rational on both ends. In organic farming especially, IPM strategies are being sought because organic farming's mantras of no pesticide and its reliance upon natural mechanisms results in a need to develop organic and natural ways of treating pests, such as natural enemies. A typical pest used to exemplify this is the lettuce aphid. Hoverflies prey voraciously on leaf aphids, and larvae are laid on an alyssum flower crop, taking up about 5 to 10% of the lettuce field. Virtually one larva per lettuce plant controls the entire aphid population on that lettuce, so this is a very effective management technique incorporating both introduction of flora and biological competition. Another interesting organic method includes a killer spice, which is a combination of vegetable oils and other spices that is sprayed on crops and has been proven from studies in Canada to be a very effective means of killing and controlling pest populations naturally. All in all, IPM involves the effective control, not eradication, of pests in an environment and the identification of the problem. After ID of the problem, it is important to come up with an effective action protocol to combat the threat economically and environmentally. Integrating several techniques often results in the best outcome, and today the argument for IPM is going pro-organic farming, as more is coming to be understood about ecological system involving natural enemies.